Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Broadcasting again live, Lakewood, New Jersey, from the house of my Chashuv Talmid, Gal. Hashem should bless him and his wife. They keep opening up their house for Torah. They should be blessed with the crown of Torah to be placed on the heads of their children. They should be Zochet, Dorei, Dorot, Yisharim, Mevorachim, of great Talmidei Chachamim, Amen, Ken Yehi Ratzon. We have a big class tonight. And the topic tonight is not a typical topic in any which way. Tonight we're going to go up on the realms a little bit and touch upon high things, but in a very sweet and gentle way. So ladies and gentlemen, open your hearts. Tonight's shir was taken, many of them are Mekomot, from Yedidi, Rabbi Gladstein, from Cedarhurst, New York. Hashem should bless him and give him health and siyata d'shmaya to continue to do the great things he does for Klal Yisrael. Ladies and gentlemen, let's start with a blessing. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu, melech ha'olam, shahakol nihiya bidvaro. Did you ever hear the concept of the Membet Masaot that the Jewish people in their 40 years of desert ended up traveling stop by stop? That's this week's parasha. Parashat Mas'eh is the parasha that counts the 42 stops that the Jewish people did in the Midbar on their way to Eretz Yisrael. The Koshnitzer Magid, he grabs on an amazing observation. He says, certain parashiot sometimes do or do not fall out during the 3 weeks of Avelut. Right now we're in the 3 weeks. The 3-week countdown going to Tisha B'Av. But the parasha of Mas'eh always falls out in the 3 weeks. Now there has to be a connection, says the Koshnitzer Magid. What is the connection between Parashat Mas'eh and the 3 weeks of Avelut leading up to Tisha B'Av? So he says something that's absolutely fascinating. He says in the Parashat Mas'eh, we're going to be counting the Mem Bet Masaot of the Jewish people in the Midbar. This week, you will see in detail, by name, we'll be counting each one of the 42 stops that the Jewish people made in the Midbar on their way to Eretz Yisrael. Says the Koshnitzer, the 42 stops. Well, in the 3 weeks, we have 42 segments of time. And the 42 segments of time found in the 3 weeks leading up to Tisha B'Av corresponds to the 42 stops of the Jewish people in the Midbar. So these 3 weeks, the 3 weeks we're in right now, they literally correspond to Parashat Mas'eh. And that's why this parasha always falls out in the 3 weeks. Now let's stop for a minute. Where in the 3 weeks do you have 42 segments of time? Says the Koshnitzer, I'll tell you. 3 weeks is 21 days. So in the 3 weeks leading up to Tisha B'Av, we have 21 days and 21 nights. Together, that is 42 segments of time leading up to Tisha B'Av, the day that Mashiach was to be born. Says the Koshnitzer, amazing. 42 stops in the Midbar to get to Israel, 42 segments of time in the 3 weeks to get to the birth of Melech HaMashiach. So therefore, Mas'eh always falls out in the 3 weeks. This is amazing. 42 stops in the Midbar, 42 segments of time leading up to Tisha B'Av. What's the connection? What's the connection between the 42 stops and the 42 segments of time found in the 3 weeks that we're in right now? Ladies and gentlemen, fasten your seatbelts. We're going to hit on very lofty things tonight. This is not the typical class, but I believe that these 21 days are very special. These 21 days are actually compared to the 21 days between Rosh Hashanah and Hoshana Rabbah. The Ben Ish Chai was known to say, the Baalei Musar was known to say, that what a Jew can accomplish in these 3 weeks, in these 21 days leading up to Tisha B'Av, is no less holy and tremendous than the 21 days that one could accomplish between Rosh Hashanah and Hoshana Rabbah. So these 21 days are underrated. And then on top of that these 21 days correspond to the 42 stops of the Midbar, we got to crack this. We got to get a better understanding of these special 3 weeks that we're in right now leading up to Tisha B'Av. Open your hearts. This week's parasha, Matot Mas'eh. We're going to read in the Mas'eh parasha, Ele Mas'eh Bnei Yisrael. And then the Torah tells us, Vayichtov Moshe et Motza'ehem lemas'ehem. Moshe Rabbeinu goes and he writes the detail in this week's parasha of every single stop that we made in the Midbar until we got to Israel. Why? Is it really so important? Isn't that trivial information? Does it make a difference to us how many times they stopped along the way? We care about the goal. We care about the final destination. We care about where we're going, not what they did on the way. Can you imagine somebody, he's traveling from Lakewood to New York, and he tells you, on my way from Lakewood to New York, I counted every single red light that I had to stop by until I finally got to Brooklyn. You look at the guy like he's out of his mind. Who counts the stops along the way of a journey? All we would care about is getting there. And yet, in this journey, in the journey of the Midbar, where Klal Yisrael is on their way to Eretz Yisrael, we're counting the stops. We're actually listing by name every stop and detail. Vayichtov Moshe et Motza'ehem lemas'ehem. Moshe went out of his way to write clearly in detail every stop, the names of the places, how we stayed there, and then how we traveled, time and time again, 42 times. Why is this information so important that the Torah goes in detail to tell us the names and the counting of all these stops? Says the great Rabbi Avram Saba, the Tzror Hamor. He says something fantastic. First, he tells us an answer al pi musar. Says the Tzror Hamor, if something so trivial and something so small as the names of the stops of where they stopped along the Midbar, and yet Torah tells you on every stop, Al pi Hashem yahanu, ve'al pi Hashem yisau. If on the small trivial information Torah wanted to tell you, Al pi Hashem yahanu, ve'al pi Hashem yisau, that even on the small pointers, but it was done by Hashem's word. Hashem told them where to stop, and Hashem told them when to go. Says the Tzror Hamor, if on the small things in life, Torah wants you to know that they did it al pi Hashem, then it comes to teach you that every prat, every detail in a person's life, it must be al pi Hashem yahanu, ve'al pi Hashem yisau. There's no such thing as something too big or too trivial, too small, that is not done al pi Hashem ve'al pi HaTorah. So every step in life needs to look like the steps of the Midbar. Every step they took in the Midbar was al pi Hashem yachanu, al pi Hashem yisau. Moshe, why are we stopping now? We just started. Because Hashem said so. Moshe, why are we resting now? All we did was travel for an hour because Hashem said so. The details in life, even those who seem trivial and don't make sense, but know that nothing happens without Hashem and Borei Olam's guidance. And that's the way a Jew has to run his life. Every stop in life, the big ones and the small ones, Al pi Hashem yachanu ve'al pi Hashem yisa'u. What a beautiful pshat. And then the Tzror Hamor, Reb Avram Saba, Zechet Tzadik Lebracha, drops a bomb on us. And then the second answer he gives is really the leg that the entire share of tonight is going to stand on. And he answers, do you know why Torah went out of its way to tell you the names of all the 42 stops in the Midbar? You think it's trivial? Not even close. Those 42 stops is the way the Torah secretly hints and teaches the 42-letter name of Hashem. The Shem Mem Bet. There's a special name of Hashem. Mem Bet, 42. 42 letters that make up this very special name of God. And this was a name that Hashem used to create the world. This was a name that Hashem used in bringing the Jewish people out of Egypt. And this will also be a name that Hashem is going to use, the Shem Mem Bet, to enter and bring the Jews out of the desert and into Eretz Yisrael. Do you know how Torah hints to us this 42-letter name? It's hinted in the 42 stops that the Jews made in the Midbar on their way to Eretz Yisrael. Unbelievable. And if this is the case, he writes, that's the reason why in Parashat Mas'eh it had to write out all 42 names. Because the Torah starts with the 42-letter name of God, and the Torah ends with the 42-letter name of God. You see, you might not know this. We're about to finish the book now of Bamidbar. And in truth, unofficially, this Parasha Mas'eh, unofficially, is really the last Parasha of Torah. You see, because the book of Devarim is really a soliloquy of Moshe Rabbeinu recapping and summarizing and re-going over what already happened. But the last book that counters the facts of the history of Am Yisrael going from Egypt into Eretz Yisrael, the last unofficial parasha of Torah, is really this week, Parashat Mas'eh. And therefore, unofficially, the last parasha talks about the 42 stops, 42-letter name of God, and the beginning of Torah, there's the 42-letter name of God as well. Let's take a look at this. The first 42 letters of the Torah in Bereshit, starting from the word Bereshit, going into the word Vavohu, the Bet in Vavohu, those 42 letters in the beginning of Torah is the 42-letter name of God. That's the name that Hashem created the world with. So the Torah starts with those 42 letters, and then in Mas'eh, the unofficial ending of Torah, it ends with the 42 stops of Israel, again, the remez to the 42 letters of God's name. Begins and ends with the Shem Mem Bet, to show you that the Shem Mem Bet were the bookends of Chamishei Chumshei Torah. Begins and ends with the Shem Mem Bet, to teach you how lofty and how incredible this secret 42-letter name of Hashem really is. And I'm going to show you tonight that this is something special. You see, because right now we mentioned that 42-letter name is what Hashem used to take us out of Egypt and into the Midbar. That 42-letter name is what Hashem took us out of the Midbar and brought us into Israel. It's a transitioning name. Every time we get to the next helm and we need to transition into a new stage, a new step, a new madrega, this name rises us up and brings us to another plateau, to the next step. And therefore the rabbis tell us, just like the Shem Mem Bet took us out of Egypt, and Hashem used the Shem Mem Bet to take us out of the Midbar to Israel, it's going to be the Shem Mem Bet that Hashem is going to take us out of Galut and bring us to Mashiach Tzidkenu in Eretz Yisrael in the final redemption. We're holding now in very lofty times. And therefore, if it's the Shem Mem Bet that's going to take us out of Galut, I'd like to learn a little bit about it, because I believe, and who am I? I'm nothing. But the rabbis of Israel, the great tzaddikim, are telling us that we're holding an Aharit HaYamim, and we're close. And that means we're coming to that transition. So if the Shem Mem Bet was always the name that God used to move us over the line of transition, we're coming up to that line. I'd like to know about it. And that's why this week's parasha is so significant to a Jew in America, to a Jew in Galut, because this parasha is the way Torah remez, hints to us, the 42 stops, but really to teach you the 42-letter name of Hashem. Parashat Mas'eh. Unbelievable. It's because of this Reb Abraham Saba Chidush, that in the 42 stops of Israel in this week's parasha, you find the lofty Shem Mem Bet of Hashem, the Magen Avraham Paskins LaHalacha. Something very interesting. You'll find this Magen Avraham in Orach Chaim, Siman Taf Chaf Chet. Says the Magen Avraham, he quotes the Tzror Hamor, that the 42 stops in this week's parasha is really the 42-letter name of God. And therefore, when the Bal Koreh reads the 42 stops this week's parasha, he's not allowed to be mafsik in between the psukim of all 42 stops, because if he would be mafsik, he would make a hefsek in God's name. Wow. So if that's the case, says the Magen Avraham, when the Baal Koreh comes to read the Aliyot, and you're splitting up the parashiot, Matot Maseh, be careful. Don't split up the portion that reads out all 42 names of the stops of Israel, because those 42 names of places is really the 42 letters of God's name. Don't be mafsik in between the name of Hashem. What a psak. He held this lahalacha, that this Tzror Hamor was really on the money. So let's talk about the 42-letter name of Hashem, known as the Shem Mem Bet. Now right away in the beginning of the parasha, there's already a hint that Torah's telling you, guys, it's coming. We're about to tell you the secret behind the Mem Bet name of Hashem. Where do you see that? Ele Mas'eh B'nei Yisrael. Ele Mas'eh B'nei. Rashi Tevot Mem Bet. Meaning the Torah is already telling you at the beginning of the parasha, Ele Mas'eh B'nei. Ele Mem Bet. I'm about to teach you the Shem Mem Bet. How? Through the Mem Bet stops, the 42 stops that the Torah is going to count in this week's parasha, name by name, place by place. So let's get this clear. Comes Reb Moshe Zakuto, and he writes, what does the Mem Bet stand for in Rashi Tevot? And he writes something interesting. He says, Shem Mem Bet. Mem Bet stands for Maaseh Bereshit. Shem Maaseh Bereshit. This is the name that Hashem used to create this world, to take it from nothing to something. That's also a transition. Remember, this name is the name that always brings you to the next step. So if Hashem wanted to bring the world from nothing to the next step of something, Yesh Me'ayin, he used a name that transitions from one step of reality to the next. Therefore, Reb Moshe Zakuto, Shem Mem Bet is Shem Maaseh Bereshit. And that's why, again, every transition went along. Hashem used Kivyachol, this name, this 42-letter name of Hashem, in order to transition the world to the next madrega, to the next step. Amazing. I think that's why the Gemara in Kiddushin tells us on Daf Ayin Aleph Amud Aleph that we don't teach this name to just anybody. Says the Gemara, be careful with this name. This is a very holy, a very special name. This is a name that really gives people the opportunity to jump from one madrega to the next, to transition from one stage of life to the next. And therefore, says the Gemara over there in Kiddushin Ayin Aleph, we only teach this name to someone who's tsanua, someone who's humble, someone who's middle-aged. We don't teach this to young people. Someone who has no ka'as, says the Gemara. You have to be careful. And we also teach it to someone who is going to be loved by everyone in this world and be beloved to the angels in the next world. Someone who is looking to have a very special place in Olam Haba. That's the Gemara in Kiddushin. So we don't give this name out to just anybody. So you're probably thinking now, so why am I talking about this? So there should not be a public class. This is not the type of thing that you advertise live on iTorah.com. And in truth, you might be right. But I'll tell you why. Because today, the concept of the Shem Mem Bet is such a well-known concept. Because I'm about to show you where it's in our life. We actually lean on this every single day. We actually lean on this Shem. You might not know it plays a role in your life on a daily basis, but it does. And I'd like to show you exactly how incredible this 42-letter name of Hashem is. The transitioning name of God. Maybe that's what we'll call the class. Do we have a connection to this Shem Mem Bet? We do. So, Rabbi, what is the Shem Mem Bet? So I'd like to tell it to you. The Shem Mem Bet is, as it's brought in Tikkunei HaZohar, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Yud, Taf, Tzadi Sofi, Kuf, Resh, Ayin, Sin, Tet, Nun Sofi. I can keep going on, etc., etc. 42 very special letters who come together to make this magnificent name. Do we have connection to these 42 letters on a daily basis? We do, you just didn't know. These 42 letters, let's repeat those again, and maybe it'll be the giveaway, you'll catch it. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Yud, Taf, Tzadi Sofi. Let's hear that again. Aleph, Bet, Ana, Bekoach, Gimel, Yud, Gidulat, Yiminecha, Taf, Tzadi Sofi, Tatir Sirura, Kuf Resh, Kabel Rinat, Ayin Shin Amecha, Sagvenu, Taharenu, Nora, Na Gibor Doshei Chudecha. You know this tefillah. The tefillah of Anna Bekoach is really the tefillah of the Shem Mem Bet. The name that Hashem used to create the world, the name that Hashem used to take us out of Egypt, the name that Hashem used to take us out of the Midbar to Israel, and the name that Hashem will use, Bikarov Biyamenu, to take us out of Galut to Melech HaMashiach, to the final redemption. Ana Bekoach was a tefillah that Reb Nechunya ben Hakaneh, he was the one that took the Shem Mem Bet and disguised it and placed it in the Rashi Tevot of Ana Bekoach, Gidulat Yeminecha Tatir Tzirura. And that's why every time in tefillah that we say Ana Bekoach, you might not realize we're actually transitioning to the next step of the tefillah. We're going from one place to a higher plateau. Every time we say Ana Bekoach, we're really hinting the Shem Mem Bet, the transitional name that transitions Klal Yisrael to the next Madrega. Example. Let's take a few examples. We come into Shabbat Kodesh. We say Mizmor LeDavid, right? Kabbalat Shabbat. We're now coming to be Mikabel Shabbat Kodesh. We're going from Chol, the weekday, to Shabbat, the holiest day of the week. Do you think that Shabbat is just another day? Just the difference is it's holy as opposed to mundane? Big mistake. Shabbat is not another day. Shabbat is another world. It's another universe. When we enter Shabbat, we enter a new realm, a new universe, a new planet. And we visit it for 24 hours. Called Shabbat Kodesh, Me'en Olam Haba, Yom Shabbat Menucha. We're entering a different world. And then when Shabbat is over, we reluctantly come back from that magnificent world called Shabbat, and we re-enter this world to start the weekdays all over again. But that's the truth. It's a transition. We go from this world of the mundane to Shabbat of a different world of Kedusha. How do we go from world to world? Ana Bekoach. How do we start our Kabbalat Shabbat? We start Mizmor LeDavid, Havu LaHashem B'nei Elim. How many times is Hashem's name mentioned in that Mizmor LeDavid? 18 times we mention Hashem's name of 4 letters, Yud Kei Vav Kei. 4 times 18 is 72. So we start Kabbalat Shabbat with the Shem Ayin Bet, the 72-letter name of God in Mizmor LeDavid. And then we go over to Ana Bekoach. Ana Bekoach speaks out the Membet, the 42-letter name of God, as we just said. Why are we saying these unbelievable names of God? Because we need to take off and literally leave the world of the mundane, leave the world of Chol, leave the weekday, and enter a new world called Shabbat. To do that, you need the transitional name of Hashem. First, the Shem Ab, the 72-letter name of God that we've spoken about in the past, and now the Shem Membet, Ana Bekoach, and that's why we say Ana Bekoach before Lecha Dodi. Ana Bekoach, we transition to the new world called Shabbat. Lecha Dodi Likrat Kala is the greeting to the Shabbat Malkita, and then Mizmor Shir Liyom HaShabbat is the acceptance of the Neshama Yitera in this new planet, this new place called Shabbat Kodesh. But that's only after we took the trip, after we transitioned to the new world called Shabbat, Al Yedei Ana Bekoach, Al Yedei, the name that transitions Klal Yisrael always to the new helm and the new realm that they are rising up to and entering. We rise up and enter the new universe called Shabbat, to enter Lecha Dodi, Bo'i Kala, Shabbat Malkita, the great greeting of the Queen of Shabbat, our Shabbat Queen, and then Mizmor Shir Liyom HaShabbat, the acceptance of the Neshama Yitera in that new realm that we transitioned to. Unbelievable. Did we have any idea all these years that we were doing that? Nah, we came into Shul Kabbalat Shabbat. We came running in. No. We swallowed Ana Bekoach because we wanted to get to the tune on Lecha Dodi. Meanwhile, we didn't realize that if you swallow Ana Bekoach, you miss the plane. And if you miss the plane, you don't transition and you don't get to the destination of the new universe that you're transitioning to. Say Ana Bekoach, word by word, very slow. And understand that at that moment, You are literally being lifted up and being sent to a new universe. That's why when we get there, L'chadodi, we greet the Shabbat Malka. And then Mizmor Shel Yom HaShabbat, we accept upon ourselves the Neshama Yitera of this new place, this new universe called Shabbat, that we're privy to stay for 24 hours. It's unbelievable. So if this is the case, Rabotai, maybe we can hit on just one more example, just to open our eyes to the behind the scenes of what goes on every time we say Ana B'Koach, and we had no idea that we were doing this at the time. The Arizal writes in Shar HaKavanot that when a Jew davens every day, let's take Shachrit for now, he goes and he ascends Olamot. He goes from the Olam HaAsiyah to the Olam Yitzirah, from Olam Yitzirah to B'ri'ah to Atzilut. He goes literally from one world to the next as he progresses in his tefillah. When he goes from Berachot and he goes to Korbanot, and from Korbanot he now goes to Psukei de Zimra. He's going from world to world in the worlds that tefillah ascend one olam after the next until it takes you all the way up to Atzilut when you enter your Amidah on the highest of the high plateaus. And then you have to come back down. How do I go from world to world? You see, down here I didn't even know I was going anywhere. I was sitting there in shul trying to keep up with the Hazan. Some people are in a different world when they're praying, but not the worlds that I'm talking about. We got to put away those phones in the middle of tefillah. It's terrible to sit in front of Borei Olam as if to show you're not interested and distracted by something else when you're supposed to be transitioning and ascending olamot. If we knew it was that lofty, maybe we would take it a little bit more serious. That's why I thought maybe to give this class. I don't normally give these classes, but I felt there is something to pick up here. There's something of an awareness that maybe now I get it. How come at the end of Korbanot we say Anna B'Koach, Dulat Yeminecha Tatir Tzurura? Oh my gosh, because when I leave Korbanot, I'm leaving the Olam HaAsiyah, and then I'm entering Psukei de Zimra. I'm entering Yitzirah. I'm going from world to world. How do you transition from one world to the next as your prayer continues? You say Ana B'Koach, as it's found at the end of Korbanot. And when we say Ana B'Koach, we transition to the next world. And then Al Yedei Yishtabach, we transition to the next world. And then finally we get to Amidah, and we hit Atzilut, and then we have to come back down again. But this is amazing. Did we understand what we were doing at the time? We are connected to this 42-letter name. We say it every day. And that's why this parasha of the 42 stops in the Midbar is so significant to us. Because that was the first place that we were taught this lofty 42-letter name of Hashem that enables us to transition and go up from one madrega to the next, in tefillah from one olam to the next, and Bezat Hashem from a galut to finally transition and to get out to a final geula. But look, we are connected to this on a daily basis. Ana B'Koach, we say in Shachrit. Ana B'Koach, we say as we leave Chol and enter the new world called Shabbat. Where else do we say Ana B'Koach? At night, right before the person goes to sleep, Kriyat Shema ala Mita. Don't we say Ana B'Koach? Isn't that an incredible transition? I mean, your neshama is leaving the world. Your neshama has to transition to leave that physical goof of a physical mundane planet and enter the realms of loftiness, enter the divine, enter Shmei Shamayim, to stand in front of God and give a din v'heshbon on how you spent your day that day. How does the neshama transition from this mundane world of physical to the loftiest heights in the next world? As we sleep, we say, Anna B'Koach, Gdulat Yeminecha Tatir Tzurura. we say it at night by Kriyat Shema Ala Mitah. Like this, our neshama can flawlessly and very easily transition itself to the next world and get cleansed while we sleep, so that the next morning when we get it back, Modeh ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayam she'echezarta bi nishmati behemla nachem l'rabba behemla, comma, pause, rabba emunatecha. This is amazing. Rabotai, open your hearts. Says the Tikkunei Zohar, and now we're going to hit a little bit of the high stuff, if we haven't hit it already. Says the Tikkunei Zohar, do you know why this 42-letter name of Hashem, the Shem Mem Bet, consists of 7 names, and each is 6 letters? Take a look at that. Ana Bekoach, Gidulat Yeminecha, Tatir Tzurah, Kabel Rinat Amecha, Sagvenu Tarenu. There are 7 stanzas, because this 42-letter name is broken out into 7 names, and each has 6 letters. 7 names corresponding to the 7 Sefirot. 6 letters, each name, corresponding to the 6 wings of the angels of Malachei Hasharet. Did you know that the angels have 6 wings? We know this from a pasuk in Yeshaya. Yeshaya Perek Vav. The pasuk says, Serafim omdim mimalo, shesh kinafayim le'ehad. Each one of the Malachei Hasharet has 6 wings. Says Rashi, why does the angels need 6 wings? What was wrong with 2? Says Rashi, 6 wings. 2 of them cover their face, so they stand in humility. 2 of the wings cover their feet, their legs, so they stand in siniut. That's right, the angels also demonstrate siniut, and how we have to take this as a lesson. When people come into shul, the angels have to stand in siniut. We have to be very careful with our tziniut wherever we go. So again, 6 wings. 2 wings cover their face to show humility. 2 wings cover their legs, their feet, to show tziniut. And 2 wings fly. Amazing. Says the Arizal in the Shar HaKavanot, this is the reason why when you say Anna Bekoach, when you say the Shem Mem Bet, you are to say it 2 wings at a time, 2 words at a time. Ana Bekoach, Gidulat Yeminecha, Tatir Tzirura. Why do we say it 2 words at a time, 2 words at a time? In order to demonstrate that they correspond to the 2 by 2 by 2 wings of Malachei Hasharet. Because each 2 meant a different purpose. 2 wings was to cover the face, 2 wings were cover the legs, and 2 wings were to fly. When a person says the Anna Bekoach, and he actually is saying the Shem Mem Bet of Hashem, he's able to fly like these celestial angels from one madrigat to the next. And that's why this became the transitional name of Hashem in Klal Yisrael. Anytime we want to enter a new realm, this is the name that transitions Klal Yisrael from one level to the next. Says the Shalah HaKadosh, say Ana Bekoach at night, Kriyat Shema Ala Mitah, your neshama will be able to transition to Shamayim, to be able to get a cleansing, standing Din V'Heshbon, and the next morning it comes back down to you, thanks to that name. Amazing. If this is the case, Rabotai, open your hearts. Writes the Bnei Yisachar, now I understand why Parashat Mas'eh has to always be in the 3 weeks. Now I get it. He says because Parashat Mas'eh is the 42 stops, which is really the 42-letter name of God, the name that transitions from one place to the next, the name that took the world from nothing to something. The name that Hashem used to take us out of Egypt into the Midbar. The name that Hashem used to take us out of the Midbar into Eretz Yisrael. Another transitional stage. So if this is the name of transition, there's no better time than in the 3 weeks of Avelut that we try to tap into this name and say, Hashem, please, let us transition out of Galut and finally into the Geulah. And that's why these 3 weeks, says the Kozhnitzer, has 42 time segments. Keneged the 42 stops of Israel. Keneged the 42 letters of Hashem's name. Because this name is what transitions us out. We want out. Al Yedei this name, we got out of Egypt. Al Yedei this name, Hashem took us out of Midbar. Hashem, please, in these days of Avelut, it has 42 segments to it. Can you please activate the 42-letter name of Hashem, Shem Mem Bet, to transition us out of Galut and into Geulah in these days of Avelut that we cry over the destruction of Bet HaMikdash and we count down to the day, Tisha B'Av, that Mashiach is supposed to be born? Please let this year be a transitional year. A year that will transition us out of Galut and finally to Eretz Yisrael. Finally to Melech HaMashiach, that we can see a Geulah Krova. Now I understand why Mas'eh always lands during the 3 weeks, because that's really what the 3 weeks is all about. Let's transition out of Galut and back to Geulah. The Shem Mem Bet and the 42 segments of these 3 weeks, this is the time to cash in. And if there was ever a time that we can use this, after everything that's going crazy on in the world, now's the time that we really want to transition out of Corona, out of the riots, out of the craziness, and be able to come back home to the Eretz HaKdosha, the way the Jews left the Midbar and entered Israel with the Shem Mem Bet. This week's parasha. We want to get out of the Galut and enter Eretz Yisrael with the Biat HaGoel Mashiach. This, ladies and gentlemen, is on a level of Klal Yisrael. Klal Yisrael transitions with this name from one stage to the next, hoping to transition now into a Geulah. But I want to tell you a secret. The Vilna Gaon, he knew how every step in Galut that we went through corresponded to the 42 stops that the Jews made in the Midbar before they went to Israel. And says the Gaon that after the destruction of the Bet HaMikdash, just like the Jews had to go through 42 stops in the Midbar to enter Israel, so too in Galut, the Jews are going to have to go through 42 stops of Galut until they make it to Mashiach Tzidkenu. And the Vilna Gaon was able to show you how every stop that we went through so far in Galut corresponded exactly to the names of the places that the Jews stopped in Midbar on their way to Israel. And he demonstrates how the first stop was Bavel, and then was Mokdan, and then after that was Paras and Madai, and then after that was Yavan, and then after that was Rome, and then after Rome we went through down to the detail, the Spanish Inquisition, Tachvetat. Each one was another stop of the miserable stops that we had to go through on these 42 stops of Galut in order to finally get to the Promised Land. And the Gaon was able to show us exactly how every single stop that the Jewish people went through in Galut, country after country, nation after nation, Holocaust after Holocaust, tragedy after tragedy, Gezerah after Gezerah, was all part of the 42 stops that we were destined to go through in Galut as the Midbar that was finally going to bring us to the last stop, to finally enter Eretz Yisrael on the final redemption, B'Biat HaGoel. And Reb Chaim Volozhiner said, And this was mimicked again instead over by the Chafetz Chaim. And Rabbi Hanan Wasserman said this over here in the United States on his brief stay when he was talking to a group of rabbis in one of the hotels in New York City before he went back to Europe to be butchered in the Holocaust. And he knew he was going back to die. But he said, what good is a shepherd without his sheep? How can I leave them there to die? I have to go back to the people, to my yeshiva, to my students. I know I'm going to die. 1938, he went back to Europe. All of these great rabbis, Rabbi Chaim Volozhiner, the Chafetz Chaim, Rabbi Hanan Wasserman told us, America is the last stop. And every time we heard that sentence, we thought to ourselves, the last stop? What does that mean? We're on a train? Yeah, we are. We are literally, like the Gaon told us, we are literally on the train of this week's parasha. And after the destruction of Second Bet HaMikdash, we were destined to go through 42 stops, whether it be countries, whether it be tragedies, but there were going to be 42 stops where we kicked out of this nation and ran to there, and kicked out of that country and ran here, and thrown out of this country and ran there, expelled from Spain and ran to Africa, to Israel, to the Middle East, to Europe. But those stops were all strategically planned with destiny, no haphazard, with hashgacha, that the exact 42 stops that the Jews went through the Midbar to enter Israel in this week's parasha, we're going to go through 42 stops along the journey of Galut, country after country, nation after nation, until the final stop before the coming of Mashiach and entering Israel for good. And our rabbis have told us that the United States of America is the final stop on this 42-stop train ride, right before the coming of Mashiach. And now that she's crumbling, and the red flags are rising on the society of the land of the brave, and the home of the free, it's the home of the free and the land of the brave, or the land of the free or the home of the brave, whichever way it goes. But now that it's crumbling, and we see that the last stop is coming to an end, we need to get ready, because the Shem Mem Bet is that name of transition. And maybe in these 3 weeks that stand for transition, we can finally transition out of Galut and into the real final redemption of Geulah. That's what's embedded in the power of these 3 weeks. Or better yet, in the power of the 42 segments of time that's found in the 3 weeks leading up to Tisha B'Av, the day that Mashiach is supposed to be born. Hitkonenu. Wake up, guys. Let's get ready. It's all here. This week's parasha, we just got to see it. Are we ready for the transition? Are we ready for the blast? Do we know where we're going? Do we have direction? Do we have a place in Israel just in case? And now I want to throw on you another hidush. And with this, I'm going to close the class. Writes the Baal Shem Tov, and the Gaon hints to this as well, that not just on a national level of Klal Yisrael are we meant to go through 42 steps as a nation until we come to a Geulah, but every individual Jew goes through 42 stops in his lifetime until he reaches his mission that he was put here in this world to do. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. And when we go upstairs, writes the Baal Shem Tov, after 120 years, Eliyahu Hanavi is going to sit with every Jew, and he's going to show him, I want to show you your Mem Bet Masaot, your life. Here's your life. You remember that? On the big 52-inch flat screen? but they're going to show you not just your life, not just every detail, but all 42 stops that you were destined to go through in life in order to complete your mission as an individual Jew, as a part of the bigger Klal Yisrael. That's amazing. For me to reach my shlemut in the destiny of the mission that Hashem put me in this world, I need to go through my own personal trials and tribulations, my own 42 challenges, my own 42 stops of a journey that only I can travel, a mission that only I can succeed. The Shem Membet. It's Hashem holding the hand of every Jew, one step, one stop after the next stop, after the next stop in life. And Hashem transitions us to every stop in our life that He destined for us to take to reach our personal shlemut in our mission in this world. That's a wow. Close your eyes. Think back how many stops in life we went through. How many challenges. How many places. How many different errors, stages of our lives that we went through as we ascended the ladder of life, transitioning. Little did we know that the Shem Membet, which is Hashem, was with us, holding our hand, and literally raising us up to the next stage. Okay, you graduated that stage, my love. Come, let me take my hand, and I'm going to pull you up to the next madrega, and the next step, and the next stage. And now you grew up in Brooklyn. But then you went to yeshiva in New Jersey. But then you went out to Israel to learn for a few years. But then I brought you back. You started to live in Lakewood. But then after that, it came to a point where I said, no more. There's a new stop on the train. Now I'm going to move you back to Brooklyn. I mean, it's amazing. He literally had it mapped out. You know what's funny? We thought we were choosing. we thought we were coming up with the plan. Okay, now I decided that I'm going to go live. You decided? What did you decide? What did you think? What did you choose? What are you talking about? This was already road-mapped. From the moment you were conceived, there was already a navigation system that was placed in your soul that already had every turn and stop on your journey of the train of life until the day you leave. And it keeps rerouting you to come back to your mission, to come back to your shlemut, to hit all 42 stops. As He held our hand, every stop of the way. And like a little kid, we look at God and say, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Hashem says, oh, hey, don't worry. I'm taking care of you. I'm watching you every stop. And when you graduate this one, I'll take you to the next one. I won't take you there before you're ready, but I won't leave you in the last stop longer, not even a second, than you should be. What a hashgacha. What an amazing hashgacha that Hashem has on the little guy, on me and you. But He loves us. As a father loves a son, and He never let go of our hand. As we go up that ladder, and sometimes it gets scary, and He says, don't worry, I'm holding you. I'm carrying you. I'm transitioning you. Even if you think you're not ready, I'll help you to feel how you're ready for the next step until you become the thing that I wanted you to become, a great Jew, shlemut. And along the way, we realize that there's no such thing as, hey, I'm not supposed to be here. If you're there, you were supposed to be there. You were put there. That was one of your stops. And life is an amazing thing. And Borei Olam shows us that I'm going to show you the places that you're going to go, the people that you're going to meet. We don't choose a thing. Everything is the divine plan and the genius of Borei Olam on the 42 personal stops until we reach our shlemut of life. And every single one is significant. Every stop that we were meant to go through, we picked up something that we didn't have before. But we needed that to get to our final stop of shlemut. When I was in high school, I was still having a good time with my friends. I guess that's a nice way of saying that I didn't really start learning yet as much as I should have. And then finally, my father decides to send me out to a yeshiva in New Jersey, and I met my beloved Rebbe, my first Rebbe, Reb Beryl Shachar Shalita. The most unbelievable Rebbe that I've ever met, the most unbelievable man, Eved Hashem, that I ever met. And he turned me on to learning with such a sweetness, that I sat and reviewed his shiur, first Seder, second Seder, and night Seder. While everybody else was doing Bikiyut on second Seder, and they were doing a different Masechet on night Seder, I only sat on my Rebbe's shiur, and he was there constantly all week. And I would drive him crazy. I would come to him and ask him question after question, and he never showed an iota of losing his patience. Just the opposite. Every time I came to him, he gave me this feeling like he was happy that I'm coming to him constantly. And we made such a bond. And that year of learning to me was special. At the end of that year, my father was so proud that his son finally was turned on to learning, that he gave me a gift. And the gift was, he bought me a ticket to go for a few weeks in the summer to spend by my grandmother in Yerushalayim as a trip for a few weeks, vacation in Israel. Now I'm going to vacation. So I took a duffel bag that was filled with t-shirts and sweatpants and one suit, Shabbat. But I was going to vacation. I was going to tour the country. I had a few friends. We were going to go around together. The first day I get there, I go to the kotel because I want to rip my shirt. I want to do kiriyah. And I meet there a very close friend. And he says to me, Duvi, what are you doing here in Israel? I said, well, my father gave me a present. He was so happy the way I learned this year. He gave me a vacation in Israel for a few weeks. I'm going to go around with some friends. He says, listen to me, before you go anywhere, I found a yeshiva here in Israel that I've never seen the likes of it anywhere in the world. Each rabbi is a bigger giant than the next. And these rabbis aren't the type of rabbis that you would expect to just bump into in a regular yeshiva. These rabbis are like out of the art scroll books. I mean, they're the ones that sleep in yeshiva all week and only go home to their wives for Shabbat. It's like you go to this yeshiva and you think you're living in an earlier generation of Torah. He says, they're giants. Each one is bigger than the next. And he starts telling me names. Rabbi Zilber. I didn't know that name at the time. Later on, I found out who Rabbi Zilber is. Diane Fisher. These are Kol Torah Kula. Nigla, Nistar. And they go home to their wives for Shabbat. And they're in their 70s. I said, wow, I got to check out this place. So I went out to Yeshivat Itri in Bet Safafa in Yerushalayim, right outside of Talpiot. And I ended up meeting one of the most biggest personalities that seemed to be bigger than life. The most charismatic man I've ever met. The very famous Rabbi Elephant, Zecher Tzadik Lebracha, the Rosh HaYeshiva. Mordechai Elephant. I could sit here and tell you stories about Rabbi Elephant and his escapades. We could be here till 3 a.m. and we won't run out. But I do want to tell you that I came to the yeshiva and I met this amazing rabbi who took me in like a son. And he told me, if you stick with me, I will give you Reb Natan Kamenetsky to learn with second Seder Havruta, the son of Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky. I will give you Diane Fisher to learn with that night, the great Diane Fisher. And I will give you Havrutot and rabbis that you've never met before in your life. Stay. I said, Rabbi, I'm here with a duffel bag of t-shirts and sweatpants. I'm here on vacation. I'm not supposed to be here in the yeshiva now. This is supposed to be my vacay. He says, I'm giving you this one opportunity. I said, how did I end up here? What's going on here? I'm very happy in the yeshiva I'm in. I just started learning. I found a great Rebbe. Okay, I'm not going back to that Rebbe next year, but nonetheless, things were going good. But Hashem had a different stop on the train. Something I didn't see coming. A transition that he blindsided and hit me with that ended up making my life. But here was the toughest moment. I had to call my father and get permission to stay in Israel, which was what started as a vacation to become a life's passion. And I went downstairs to the public phone. You remember those phones in Israel that took the asimon? You remember that? And I called up and called America collect. And my father picks up the phone and I said, Abba, I know over the years I gave you all types of nights that you stayed up and you couldn't sleep because of me. I know what I did to you in high school. And I know this past year was the first year I learned for real. But Abba, I'm begging you. On this one, you got to trust me just once. I want to push off my ticket. I found the most amazing yeshiva in Israel with giants, gidolim, of rabbis, talmidei chachamim, that are being handed to me for free. Please, I'm begging you. Just trust me on this one. Once. Let me stay for 30 days. Let me just push the ticket off to the end of Elul. I will come back home, Sukkot. Just give me one shot at this. Let me see what it's really about. And there was silence on the phone. And it felt like forever. Till finally, after 20, 30 seconds, my father says, okay, I'll trust you on this one. I want you to know that that was a miracle in itself. The fact that he gave that to me, until today, it makes no sense to me. That was Borei Olam saying, I just transitioned you to the next stop on your train. Use it. And use it well. And that next 30 days, I was wearing my Shabbat suit for 30 days straight, because it was the only white shirt, black pants I had. I wasn't walking into the Bet Midrash with bum equipment. Those who you that grew up in the 80s, you remember that name. I came in with my Shabbat suit every single day for 30 days. But that Elul was the greatest Elul to kick off a new step on the train of a new stop that was going to later on change my life. After those 30 days, I went home Sukkot, and I started telling over my father all the shtickle Torahs, all the pieces of shiurim that I heard from these giant rabbis, and my father was blown away. And I said, Abba, I'm begging you, let me go back. I'm begging you, let me go back. Just give this to me. I got this amazing, amazing break in life. Don't take it from me. Please, I was transitioned to the next stop, maybe a little bit early, but I want to take it for everything I got. And he says, okay, I'll run with you on this one. And he sent me back. And I stayed for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, another half a year, 3.5 years as a bachur, till I finally came back and started dating. And then after I got married, went back again another 2.5 years and wrote a sefer and was there in Kollel. Those years changed my life. And I had no idea that when I showed up with a sweatpants and t-shirts on a vacation was Hashem's plan for the next stop on my train. A stop that literally sent my life to a direction that I always believed one day I'll get to, but I had no idea that that was the moment that Hashem had planned. He already has it mapped out. It's amazing. And then after, we come back. We come to Lakewood, New Jersey. And in Lakewood, I started a chabura in the yeshiva. Very successful, 50, 60 guys. And was there for quite a few years. Until one Shabbat, my father-in-law tells me, there's a shul down the block here, Har Lebanon. Did you ever hear of it? I said, yeah, I heard of it. He says, well, the rabbi there, Rabbi Jamal, was asking me if I know somebody that was good to start a teenage minyan. You want to give a shot at it? I said, well, I could use the little extra. Yeah, it's something that I want to go into one day anyways. I always had a knack for the teens. They always connected with me and I was connected with them. Why not? I started off that Shabbat. That was the next step on the train. I had no clue that I was in transition mode. It seemed so innocent and so haphazard, so heke. And Rabbi Jamal met with me and he said, try these boys upstairs. And we met together that first Shabbat. I'll never forget that first Shabbat. I remember the speech I gave that first Shabbat 20 years ago. And there in the room was a bunch of 11th graders from Yeshiva Sha'arei Torah. One guy by the name of Jack Sroor, another guy by the name of Shai Zeytune, a third guy by the name of Ovadia Senado, a bunch of 11th graders. Did I know that I just met the future pillars of my life, of my Talmidim, of a future shul, a mainstream shul that later is going to hold 200 families? כי במקלי עברתי את הירדן הזה, ועכשיו הייתי לשני מחנות. Did I know that that was a transitional moment? No! But Hashem was saying, I'm holding your hand, and I'm taking you now to the next step. And although you don't know you're going there, but I'm going to be there with you. And from 11 guys it went to 20, and from 20 it went to 50, and from 50 it went to almost 100. And then we started our Membet Masaot. We went from one shul to the next shul, and then from one shul to the next shul, and then to a third shul, and then back to this shul, till finally Hashem said, I'm going to give you the Shem Membet and pull you out and transition you to the promised land of your own Magen Abraham. And every step we picked up something, and every step we learned something, and every step we perfected something, till finally we got to the stop of building our own Mikdash Ma'at, Magen Abraham. And then, only a little bit over a month ago, Hashem in His mercy gave us the opportunity to buy the building. And now it's literally home away from home. Abba, you gave me your Shem Membet, step by step in my life. Some tough times. Sometimes I gave my parents not an easy swing. But you were there for me on every stop of that train, including to the most recent where you bought me the shul, and you gave me the greatest Talmidim in the world, and you gave me guys that became great Bnei Torah, and you gave me a Torah center of over 100 guys that are all learning till today on Zoom, at night, in the morning, and now Halacha, and Masechet Chulin. Chulin, could you ever imagine what I believe? I'm teaching Chulin Be'eyun, but it's another stop on the train. You Messiah Berachot, you Messiah Pesachim. I want you to go now to Halacha L'Maseh, Hilchot Basar V'Chalav. And these guys are ahead of me. The Talmidim are ahead of the Rebbe. Hashem, you gave us so much. Hashem, stop for a minute, ladies and gentlemen, and look back at your 42 stops. Look back at your 30 stops, your 20 stops. But look at all those transitional stages that you went through in life, and stop and open your eyes to see that Hashem was there on every stop of the way, and say thank you. Thank you. You were there by my bar mitzvah. You wrapped my arm in tefillin. You were there in my teenage years. You protected me from the bad friends. You were there when I got married. You brought me this girl. You were there at that first cry of my child in the delivery room. And wow, was that a moment that I'll never forget for the rest of my life. But you transitioned that stage of my life as parenthood. And then from there, you brought me to the next step of bringing up my kids. And then from there, you brought me to the next step of my children becoming bar mitzvah, or my children dating. To To think that I was the father, to have a guy walk into my house and to sit down and to look in his eyes and to see he's nervous in front of me when I was him only a short time ago. But then you transitioned me to that next stage. And you brought me there, Abba. And now you married my daughters off to wonderful Talmidei Chachamim. And now you brought us Talmidim. And you made weddings for our children. And then we get the phone call that my child just had a child. And you transitioned me to be a grandfather. And you're still transitioning me on all 42 stops. And they just get sweeter as we go because we're doing this together, Abba. We're doing this together. And now we're here in the last stop in America. And we want you, Abba, in these 3 weeks, the 42 segments corresponding to the 42 Masaot, activate Anna Bekoach Gdulat Yeminecha and say, Abba, I'm ready to transition with you to Eretz HaKodesh. I'm going to stop doing the things that I know I should not be doing. And I'm going to start doing the things that I know I should be doing because I want this to be a seamless transition, both on a personal level for my mission in life and for Klal Yisrael. It's time to go home. In these 3 weeks, we could transition with the Shem Mem Bet in the 42 segments of these 21 days to the day that Mashiach was supposed to be born. And who knows, maybe the day he'll be Megaleh. We should be Zochet together to finally transition with the Shem Mem Bet out of the Midbar into Eretz Yisrael like this week's parasha and be Zochet finally to the Geula Krova. Thank you for giving me your heart and thank you for listening. Have a good night.